Good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome to today's seminar, and I must give a hat tip to Kevin there, who suggested that I invite Jen, because he's been following her with great interest on Twitter, and it's good to make things up a bit and make us think about the data that we use, and data that collected, and how we can improve things. So gender equality has always been a very strong personal interest of Jen, especially as she's progressed through her own career in technology. And she's driven programs such as Grant Smart for Tech, and she's done outreach programs with Ballycullen Family Resource Centre to encourage young girls to remain in STEM subjects. And she continues to seek opportunities to encourage diversity in STEM. So, frustrated by the lack of the Promise reporting for gender pay gap reports, she decided to dust off her software skills and solve the problem herself. So, without further ado, Jen, over to you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me, first of all, and thanks for you all for coming to listen to me talk about my baby pet project that has been occupying a lot of my time for the last year and a half or so. So, who am I? Hi, I'm Jen. I'm a graduate of NUI Maynooth and the Open University with a bachelor's in computer science and biology. Yes, that is a weird combination, and I will answer questions about that if you would like. And the Open University, where my master's was primarily in science communication and education, with a little minor in addiction and neural aging, because I just thought, why not? I've been working in technology since 2007. First as a software engineer for about 8 or 9 of those years, and since then as a product manager. As Darren mentioned there, I've always had a special interest in gender equality, mostly fueled by my choice in education and my choice in career. As you can imagine, working in software, I've primarily been working in a lot of very male-dominated environments, and I'd be lying if I said I'd never experienced gender bias myself or seen it play out in things like pay discussions, bonuses, promotions, etc. Most recently, I'm an accidental citizen data scientist. It's not something I really planned to be, but something that I was kind of thrust into a little bit by our gender pay gap legislation and what I see as some failings in the area. So let's talk about the gender pay gap legislation, in case you're not familiar with it. Similar legislation has been in place in the UK since about 2010. It was newly introduced in Ireland in 2021 with a first reporting year of 2022. Our legislation says that organisations with over 250 employees have to report, and that threshold is lowering over time. So this year, it'll be organisations with 150 employees or more, and eventually down to 50 by 2025. It's not going to go any lower than that, because obviously once you start to go lower than that, you risk essentially personally identifying information, and that's not really the goal of the project. The UK legislation has led to a really excellent central queryable resource. So companies in the UK have to report to a central portal. Maybe they can put it on their website if they want, but they have to report to a government managed central portal. Anyone can go to that resource, they can query it, you can type in any company name and see the entire history of their reports, how it's changed over time, etc. You can also access it via API, which is great because it means you can integrate it into other things. A particular example of that, which I like, and which is one of the things that also inspired me on this project, is the UK Gender Pay Gap Twitter bot, which unfortunately I think is no longer active, because now you have to pay a lot of money every month to access Twitter APIs. But when it was active, every International Women's Day, whenever a company in the UK would tweet a lovely picture of women laughing at salad and their International Women's Day slogan, it will quote tweet them with their gender pay gap. Now, it's a neutral source, it's positive, like it's just neutrally reporting this is the number, whether the number is good or bad. If you tweet about International Women's Day, it will tweet to say what your gender pay gap is. I enjoyed following that account a lot. And so when the Irish legislation came out, I thought, oh cool, are we going to be able to do something like this in Ireland? That's going to be really exciting. So what does reporting in Ireland look like? Each of the companies that are obliged to report have to report a set of certain things. They can report other things in addition to this, and some of them do, but this is the minimum set of what they have to report. So it's the difference in mean and median hourly pay for men and women, and figures for part-time and for contract or temporary employees separately. They also have to report the difference in mean and median bonus, the percentage of male and female employees that were paid benefit in kind or bonus if you pay those, and the pay quartiles. What they mean by that is if you lined up everybody in the company, ordered based on how much they are paid, divide that into 4 blocks, tell me how many men and women are in each of those 4 blocks. Lowest, lower middle, upper middle, and highest. The way our reporting works is that you have to choose a date in June and report by that date in December. So you have 6 months to report from your chosen snapshot date, and your snapshot deals with the year before. So in practice, that has meant that most companies choose the absolute last date in June. No surprises there. And we'll talk about whether or not they are actually meeting the publishing deadline. So it's supposed to be publicly available, and it's supposed to be publicly available by that date in December. So if you pick 10th of June, you have 6 months to prep, and it's the 10th of June or whatever that you would take the snapshot of your payroll and then do your analysis on your payroll data. So let's talk about the tragic reality. Okay, so the reality of gender pay gap reporting in Ireland, there is still no central portal in Ireland. The wonderful UK government resource that exists doesn't exist here. They did say they were going to make one, but the latest reporting that I've seen is we still don't have one, and they still don't have a date as to when we might have one. I have seen no effective governance of the reporting, and I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that, but functionally no one is overseeing the reporting, the quality of the report, whether it's valid, whether it's published on time. They kind of just put the legislation out of there and then forgot to care about the rest of the parts of it. There is no standard format for the reports, so they vary from a simple 1-page that kind of barely has the company logo on it to 40-page glossy reports of like happy women working in a company and then a page of data maybe at the end of it. Because of this huge variance, it's very, very hard to actually gather all of the data, and that's probably why there aren't lots and lots of these portals. Up until now, mostly if you've wanted to get a look at a large data set, it's been kind of fragmented individual efforts online. I've spoken to some journalists who've done a little bit, I've spoken to some researchers who've done a little bit, but it's all been quite fragmented efforts because there is no central portal and because there's no standard format, so it's a very manual process. So I decided to change that. From this was born paygap.ie, formerly gpg.ie. This has very much been a labour of love. It started as 1 page on my personal site in 2022 on my blog, where I gathered as many companies as I could and embedded a table that you could search and just look at the headline figures. When it became apparent to me that there wasn't going to be a portal in time for the next year, I started putting together my 2nd page, and I very quickly realised that that actually wasn't going to cut the mustard. For anyone who's very technical, it was built in a WordPress site, and once I started wanting to do more things, I really had to break out of essentially the restrictions of WordPress because I wanted to write specific code and I couldn't embed that nicely enough in a WordPress page. So once I started trying to do that for a 2nd page and for more data and analysis, it simply wasn't going to be able to live in that framework. As I mentioned on the other site, it is a painfully manual process. Because there's no standardized format for the report, there's no really good way to build any sort of automated data scraper. There's no telling how people are going to report the figures in their PDF. Is it even going to be a PDF? Are they going to have it in a table or in a graph? Are they going to put the word median in 20 places or just where they're reporting the median? As a result, every single line of data that you see on this site and in this data set has essentially been manually processed by me. I have I don't think I'm the only person in Ireland who's read every single gender pay gap report that has been published, but I think I'm part of a pretty exclusive club. It's very manual. But despite all of this, I was really keen to basically have a dedicated public resource to share the data as easily and as widely as possible. Just to note, why is it pay gap and not GPG? Fun story. When I started doing this, I was like, I'll pop it on my blog again. That's not going to work. It needs its own place to live. A lot of the pay gap related domains were already purchased. So I got gpg.ie and I thought, it's fine, it will do. And the owner of paygap.ie had bought paygap.ie intending to do this, hadn't gotten around to it, and reached out to me on Twitter to say, hey, do you want this domain? Because you did the thing that I bought the domain to do. So a nice social media outcome. Someone actually reached out and transferred the domain to me, and now I have paygap.ie, which is nice for search engine related reasons. So a little screenshot of some of the pages here. This, you can see along the top there, a couple of different tabs. You can see the data, use the data, new reports, and I'll talk about some of those functions later. I did put in an understanding the data page after talking to my mum about some of the figures and realizing that, again, because not everybody in Ireland is just like consuming these reports like oxygen, not everybody knows what I mean when I say a pay quartile. So I popped in a little page to explain in simple language, what do I mean when I say pay quartile? What am I talking about when I say median? So you can see the list of companies and their headline figures. That's a searchable, sortable list and links out to all of their original reports. I'll put an asterisk there and I'll explain that later. And when you click on a company, you can see a link to their website, the industry that they are in. You can see any reports that I have for them over the years, the change over time for their headline figures, and a block for any of their additional data. So the pay quartiles, the bonus benefit in kind, the part-time and contract hourly gap, and the workforce split. This is not something that they're obliged to report, but many companies do report on their overall workforce split. Because I wanted it to be as accessible as possible, you can toggle between graphs and just a table of the data. So if visual is not how you choose to process this information, that's cool. Flip the switch, you can just have it in a table as well. So what's available? Simple visuals and data for every company, but also the raw data split by year or all in one file. On the site, there is a page where you can download the data in CSV form, and it's the full normalized data set. It's also shared on GitHub in case that is your jam and for version tracking. There is a report sharing form, so if anyone comes across a report that I have missed, there's a form there where you can, at a minimum, send me the link, or if you want to help me out, you can actually put in the figures, and that goes into a nice moderation system that I have to make sure that it's all correct before I pop it into the database. There's also a missing report tracker, and again, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but basically does a database query to look for who should have a report and doesn't have a report. I'm also trying to continuously improve it, so I recently added industry classifications, mine, GICS, and ICB. Why mine? Because GICS and ICB don't actually have classifications for everything. They are industrial classification types, but they're mostly based on stock market things, and not everyone is in the stock market, would you believe? So there are classifications such as local government and public service and things that don't actually have a box to slot into in those two classifications. But since they're standard, I've included them, and those are now in the data set when you download them as well. So you can do industry grouping analysis. To my next point of like, why did I do this? Like, why am I spending all of my weekends looking at PDFs? What is wrong with you, Jen? Fundamentally, because this question continues to bug me, which is how useful is reporting without central data that you can compare? In my opinion, not. The answer is not. Without a central resource where you can compare data year on year, where you can compare like with like, where you can look at industry groupings or whatever other groupings that make sense to you and the research that you're doing, companies might as well print out their gender pay gap reports and then feed them directly into a shredder. Without central data, I believe that in its current form, the legislation is effectively unusable. Because there's no format, There's no way to automate the data gathering. So even when they bring out a central portal, if they ever bring out a central portal, there's going to be almost no way to backfill that data because there hasn't been a central resource. So somebody, some poor civil servant, is going to have to go and do my job unless they download CSV. And lastly, because fundamentally I believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant. Many people will experience bias in employment, bias in different industries. And a lot of the time when you bring this up, people say, where's the data? Where's the study? Prove that this was the case. And the data, sometimes it's very hard to come across that data. It's very, you can put out a 40-page, lovely glossy PDF. You can have a page on your website talking about all of the wonderful things that you do for the women who work in your company. You can put out your tweet on International Women's Day, but you can't hide if you pay your female employees 40% less than you pay your male employees. And when you have access to that data, it's a very powerful thing. It's a powerful thing for negotiating. It's a powerful thing for making your career decisions. It's a powerful thing for understanding where companies are in industry and for advocating for change. So I really, really believe that having this data, like I said, sunlight is the best disinfectant. If you can't see what the problem is, you can't advocate to change the problem. And I really want people to be able to see what the state of play is so that we can try and change it or make it better for everybody. So let's take a look at some of the actual data. This is just a super high level analysis. Put a caveat here, I am not an economist, I'm just a me. Let's talk about the good. Local government, by which I mean city and county councils, remain an excellent place to work if you are a woman. They almost all have a negative median pay gap. A note here that you'll mostly hear me talking about median rather than mean. When you see it in the media, they predominantly are publishing the mean figure and not the median, but sure, I don't have to tell people in this room, obviously the mean is much more likely to be skewed by a single crazy value. So I prefer to use the median when I'm talking about these, and the UK Gender Pay Gap bot uses the median for the same reasons, incidentally. So Dublin City Council, it's very low, it's a very low pay gap, it's 3.14% positive. But all of the local governments have a negative median pay gap, by which it means they actually pay women more than men. Public sector in general, so including local government, but expanding to include government departments like Department of Education, Department of the Taoiseach, and government organisations like Quilcha. The average median is minus 2.7%. The Chief State Solicitor's Office wins the gong for the lowest median gap of minus 30.77. So some lucky women in that office are being paid approximately 30% more than their male colleagues. 9 companies have a median gap of 0. So they have pay parity. The good continued. 139 companies have a negative median pay gap overall. So that ranges from, say, the minus 30 up to just maybe minus 0.1 or more or less parity. And 44 companies had parity in their highest paid quartile. So that means that they had roughly equal amounts of men and women working in their highest paid group of people, which generally kind of means more women in their senior leadership roles. I say within 1% because I was generous. I looked for 49 to 51% bracket. I didn't just cut them off at straight 50-50. 46 companies had a median bonus gap of 0 and 71 had negative gaps. How lovely. However, the N for 2023 was 588, so actually in context 44 is not that cheerful. Let's talk about some of the bad. These, like I said, these figures that I'm talking about where it's like, oh, 9 companies, cool. There are almost 600 reports for 2023, so 9 companies seems very small when you look at that. Many companies reported extremely late. I still have 36 reports missing from 2023, and up until the last couple of weeks, I have still been gathering reports, and a quick reminder that all of those reports were due at the latest by the end of December last year. So yeah, I mentioned kind of a lack of governance, and this is a really big problem. Basically, loads of companies reported late. I am still searching almost every week for new reports and finding them. I have emailed companies. I have reached out to them directly on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter. I am sure they are sick of the sight of my name, and companies have done everything. Some of them, in fairness, when I reached out on LinkedIn, did provide me with links to reports. More of them viewed my profile and then left me on red. There's also been a lot of incorrect reporting. In addition to companies reporting late and nobody apparently caring, there's lots of incorrect reporting. So the Brothers of Charity reported in euro and not percentage, which meant I had to do math on purpose to figure out what the percentages were. Octavo, Ardmach, Dublin Bus, and a bunch of others reported their quartiles incorrectly. Each quartile should add up to 100, so you can do a percentage. And some people just, I don't know how they mathed their quartiles, but they did it badly. And I cannot stress enough that they provide explicit guidance as to how to do it, so there is literally no excuse. Mazars and Standard Life just didn't include all of the required data. Some people just put out reports with like half the data and then they say good enough, and then they just don't ever update that report. Talked about finding obscure links or finding data in obscure places. Lots of people removed or replaced last year's report, even though the legislation says that you have to keep it available for at least 3 years since you publish it. So many of the links in my database are already archive.org links. 16 of them are gone altogether. And this year when I've been gathering the data, I've been on purpose saving every single one in archive.org as I've been gathering them, because I don't really trust that companies are going to do what they're supposed to do. Lots of them just have one link on their website that is gender pay gap report, and when you click on it, it brings you to the latest one, and the other one is just gone. I have pointed it out to companies. Some of them have remedied it, many of them have not. The EU average gap is 13%, and I will point out this is the mean because, again, as I mentioned, most people report the mean. 202 companies in that data set of 588 are equal or worse, approximately a third. The average for my data set as a whole is 10.73, and 249 companies are equal or worse. 281 companies have a bonus gap of 5% or more. I've just picked 5% as a generous number. Really no bonus gap is great, but 281, so almost half of the companies have a gap of 5% or more. So that's the good, the bad. Probably I'll tell what's coming next. The quality of reporting, let's talk about it. It's extremely poor, it's very variable, and it is often inaccessible. And this is a point that I really want to just spend a minute on, because I went to great lengths to make sure that my website was accessible. I checked it with accessibility standards to make sure that the colors were useful. I made sure you could navigate it with a screen reader. I made sure you could toggle between graphs and data. This is a level of forethought that most companies did not put into their reports. These are screenshots from some reports. This is the workforce split from Respond in 2022 in shades of green and slightly different green. And these are the quartiles from Quilcha in 2022. I assure you it's still like this in 2023, also in shades of green and slightly different green. The tiny dots at the top are all you have to figure out which of these shades of green they would like the women to be and which of the shades of green are men. So have fun with that. Moreover, in most of these cases, the data is only shared in this graph form. It wouldn't be so bad if they had a crappy graph, but then had a table underneath that had the data so that you could read it anyway. But a lot of the time, it's just this. And it gets worse. So please enjoy the Cork City Council headcount in shades of red and kind of reddy orange-brown, or the Kildare County Council quartiles in shades of red and slightly darker red, and turn your head sideways to read. Again, these figures were not presented in text, they're only presented in these graph forms. And given that red-green colour blindness is one of the most common forms of colour visual impairment out there, it feels pretty rough to me that you're publishing these reports in ways that people cannot parse the data. It's not just awkward for people to read this. Some people are just not actually going to be able to tell the difference between these colours, and they have no other way to find out this information. These are just some of the offenders. There are more. A particular notable one that I loved was a company that had their quartiles in light blue and dark blue in one year, and then they just swapped the colours blue the next year. So it looked like they'd made really good progress, but actually they just swapped which colour blue was men and which colour blue was women. As I said, the quality is very variable. And again, it's not just a, gosh, this is frustrating for me perspective. It's literally fundamentally inaccessible for a resource that they're legally obliged to publish. And the rest. So headline figures are pretty much always the mean pay gap. When you're seeing news articles in January next year, they're almost always going to be talking about the mean gap. I have always personally found other figures more interesting. For example, the bonus gap is, in my opinion, a more interesting figure. There are lots of companies that have initiatives that have pay parity pretty much, because that's set at higher org structures, because that's set by HR, but still have huge inequality in the quartiles or huge inequality in bonus gaps, because those tend to be much more influenced by your direct manager. Looking at bonus gaps in the context of companies which claim to have achieved pay parity can uncover, for example, bias at team levels. I also enjoy looking at the quartiles, because they show predominantly where companies are still very uneven at senior levels. Again, you can have companies that have achieved pay parity, you can have companies that have a pretty good workforce split, but when you look at it, 75, 80, 90% of the people in the highest pay brackets are still men. And I think a lot of the time the headline figures focus on the mean pay gap because it's a nice splashy figure. You know, sometimes a company has like a 70% pay gap and that's a great headline grabber. But for me, the quartiles show where a lot of growth is still needed to happen, because you can increase pay here and there, but what you're still seeing is gaps in senior leadership roles, and those are the roles that drive a lot of policies within companies. Just looking at some of the gaps in the data, this is the 2023 data set, and these are the GICS industries, just to, so people know. The financial industry fares pretty poorly on the median bonus gap. It's 26%, so men are on average receiving 26% higher bonus. Real estate has the highest median pay gap at 23%, and Atlas car testing wins the bad gong prize at having a median of 100%. Should note that Atlas report 4 different entities. That's testing 2 and inspection 2. And they're split then into monthly and fortnightly. If you don't know who they are, they run our NCT. And their different groups differ a little bit in their gender makeup. Industrials, materials and IT are still disproportionately male at the top. They are, without question, the industries where still in senior leadership, it is predominantly men in those roles. So I spent a lot of time looking at data. Who else is looking? So luckily, I have some tracking on the website, and people have reached out to me to talk to me about the data set, and it's been very gratifying to find people who are interested and want to know about the data and want to use the data. Answift Consulting wrote a nice post about minding the gender gap, analysing the 2023 pay gap data. Michelle Dervin Skills Trust is actually writing a whole blog series about why the gender pay data is very frustrating. Not dissimilar to many of the things I've been talking about here as to why it's very frustrating. Sarah O'Sullivan cited my site in this paper published here, the first year gender pay gap reporting in Ireland, a sociological analysis. Plotly, which is it's a Python library used for data visualizations, graphs and things like that, and they do a weekly thing called Figure Friday, where they share a data set with the community and say, have at it, create a visualization, use Plotly to do something cool with the data. And they used this data set in week 32. I've been reaching out to them, and we're going to make it an annual thing. So next year they'll do it with 2024's data set. And last but not least, there is an Irish gender pay gap bot at GenderPay.ie. And since I'm among friends, I might as well say that's me. I don't know if that's going to be hugely surprising given what I've been talking about, but that's me. And so I myself have been using that data set for the last 2 years to quote tweet Irish companies when they tweet on International Women's Day. Again, horribly manual because the Twitter API costs like hundreds of dollars a month to access now. I'd love to automate it, but it's just not possible. But again, a nice thing that I hope to continue doing with the data set. So what's next? I intend to continue with the portal until there's a real one. I don't know how long that's going to be, and I'm aware that that's a pretty big undertaking because, as I mentioned, there's more companies coming on stream this year, and I don't even have a particularly good list of who those companies are. I have contacted my TDs to remind them that they promised a portal, and I have contacted Roderick O'Gorman's office to remind him that they promised a portal, and I'm going to continue to keep doing that. I have said that if they're not going to give us a portal, they need to give us a list of the companies who are obliged to publish, so that those of us who are doing these citizen projects can actually get that list together and gather the data and essentially provide the resource that they have failed to provide thus far. And if I could encourage you to do one thing, it would be to do the same, because right now I'm just one crackpot emailing them, and it would be great if like 40 crackpots were emailing them about it. Goes to my next point, encouraging others to help gather the data. If there's anyone who has a resource, who comes across a report, who comes across anything that would help me to continue to keep this resource up to date and accurate, I would love to hear from you. I have my contact details on the next slide. Absolutely love hearing about people using the data, building out the data, etc. And as I mentioned, I have a form directly on the site or my email address. There is no email too short or silly. I want to hear it all. I'm going to keep adding more analysis to the portal. As I mentioned, I have added industries. I'm going to add another category now. And I'm going to try and add some more analysis so that people don't have to necessarily download the whole data set and do their own analysis, but that they can get some visuals on, say, industry groupings, as well as just looking at the individual company list. Last but not least, I'm obviously going to keep sharing the portal as much as possible because, as I mentioned earlier, sunlight is the great disinfectant, and the point of data is that it should be there and available for everybody to use it. I want it to be a useful data set, so I want as many people as possible to be able to see it. Contact details are there, jenniferkeane.ie, paygap.ie, LinkedIn, or hello@jenniferkeane.ie. Thank you very much.